Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. By Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the T-Slim X2 insulin pump. And by Real Good Foods. Real food you feel good about eating.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, let's talk about complications. That's a hashtag created by this week's guest, who takes a topic that most of us would rather avoid, frankly, and puts it into the spotlight.
There is this assumption that you get diagnosed with diabetes of whichever type, and then you live your life with diabetes. And if you get diagnosed with a complication, it is because you didn't look after yourself, which is not true.
Chris Aldred is better known as the Grumpy Pumper, and he wants us to stop being ashamed and frightened to talk about possible complications from diabetes and to stop the blame surrounding this dicey issue. I'll also ask him, why grumpy? Plus, your diabetes educator is getting some help when it comes to staying current on technology. We'll talk about a new resource for educators called Dana in our Community Connection. And tell me something good. 2 great stories this week. A big step forward for a 5-year-old and a big award for a tween. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. I'm your host, Stacey Sims. So glad you could join me for what sounds like a pretty serious and maybe a scary show, the topic of complications. But I really think this is important, and I hope that when you are finished listening this week, you leave not with dread and fear, but with a new way of looking at things when it comes to possible complications, and at the very least, talking about them. It's hard to imagine someone better to take this on than Grumpy. I mean, this cracks me up. Chris's name on Twitter and social media is the Grumpy Pumper. And we do talk about that. He's got like the dwarf, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Grumpy, with a little insulin pump as his icon or his avatar, I guess. But he has done a terrific job of really laying this out with humor and with heart. So I'm glad you're here, and I hope you enjoyed the interview with Chris. I do want to let you know that just 2 days before this episode was set to air, we take the interviews ahead of time, and I put the episode together along with my editor several days at least before it airs. And on Sunday, February 3rd, Chris announced that his youngest son had been diagnosed with type 1. He did it this way. This was how he announced it on Twitter. And again, his handle is the Grumpy Pumper. "We have someone new to welcome to the diabetes community as of today," he wrote. "He's not on Twitter. He's 16. He's my youngest son. Hashtag GBDOC, which is the Great Britain Diabetes Online Community." Of course, we didn't talk about this during the interview. Neither one of us could have known. And I didn't call Chris back or try to re-record anything or get a statement. I mean, he's dealing with quite enough as it is right now. But I did want to let you know, I would urge you, and I'll link up all of his information as I always do with each episode. Follow him on social media. He's being brutally honest, as he always is. And he's also talking about Spare a Rose, which I'm going to tell you more about in just a moment, and being an advocate as well as being a dad. So, Grumpy, we are all on your side. It just stinks that this happened. But you know better than most that this community is like no other. And I hope that we can lend our strength and our support to your family at this time. So this is kind of hard to segue out of and continue with everything I had planned for the show already. I do want to let you know about Diabetes Podcast Week, but I feel good about that because it benefits Spare a Rose, which is something near and dear to Chris's heart, and he has been talking about it quite a bit. We'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But Diabetes Podcast Week is an annual event that I've organized where you will hear from a lot of different podcasts, maybe some you haven't heard of before. A lot of people kind of come in and out of the space. They try podcasting or, they stick around, but maybe they don't produce every single week. But there are some great stories out there and some great shows. And I want to make sure that, hey, if you like podcasting, if you're like me, I listen to a ton of shows every week. So I started Diabetes Podcast Week a couple of years ago to help us all find all of the different podcasts in our community and to help a great charity to help spare a rose. And this is an annual event. It happens right around Valentine's Day, where the idea is to just buy fewer roses, just one rose even. For the cost of that, you can really help a child with diabetes in parts of the world that don't have the basics. And yes, this organization also does help people in the US, but much more about that next week with Diabetes Podcast Week. I also want to tell you about something that happened not too far from here. Many of you know I'm in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. And of course, you probably know that Nick Jonas has type 1 diabetes. He's probably the most famous person in America with type 1. Well, he got married recently. You may not know that his family owns a restaurant not too far from here. It's called Nellie's Southern Kitchen. I have never been there. Isn't that terrible? It's in a part of town that I never go to. It's not even in Charlotte. It's in Gastonia, which is an adjacent city to here. And I know I'm just making excuses. I've got to get there. But anyway, they had this beautiful wedding reception. And, everybody from the paparazzi was there. I had a couple of friends who live not too far from there who are in Charlotte media. And one of them was kind of like live tweeting as she drove by. And just trying to weigh the cost benefit of getting a little too close, trying to slip in the back door perhaps. And she very wisely kept on driving. But this is a restaurant that is really Southern in its roots. I mean, we're talking about, collards and biscuits and gravy and chicken and dumplings. So I will get over there eventually. But if you're in the Charlotte, North Carolina area ever, maybe you have a long layover at our beautiful airport. We're a hub, so we connect everywhere. You can shoot over to Gastonia, which is probably about half an hour from the airport, and go over to Nellie's Southern Kitchen. And that's your commercial for the Nick Jonas family restaurant. All kidding aside, he does drop in every once in a while, and it's fun to watch them on Twitter just talking about the restaurant, and they've got music, and it's been a nice thing for the area. My wedding invitation must have just been lost in the mail. Okay, the Grumpy Pumper coming up in just a moment, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom, and we have been using the Dexcom G6 since it came out last year, and it really is amazing. The Dexcom G6 is now FDA permitted for no finger sticks for calibration and diabetes treatment decisions. You do that 2-hour warm-up, and the number just pops up. We've been using Dexcom for more than 5 years now, so I am still getting used to that. I've sent Benny off to school. We've put a new sensor on in the morning, and I've said, make sure you calibrate in 2 hours. And he looks at me, Mom, I don't have to calibrate anymore after 2 hours. The number just pops up. It still seems amazing to me. It just keeps getting better. The G6 has longer sensor wear, now 10 days, and the sensor applicator is so easy to use now. Benny does it himself. He says no pain. Of course, we still love the alerts and alarms, and that we can set them how we want. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 don't match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. My guest this week is Chris Aldred, but I had to Google his real name. Most of us just know him as the Grumpy Pumper, an outspoken advocate of the language of diabetes and a spokesperson for the Spare a Rose campaign, which I mentioned earlier. Chris is taking on a subject that, frankly, a lot of us would really rather not talk about: complications. I wondered if this was a podcast people would listen to at all. I mean, I could do technology every single week, right? We could interview Dexcom every week. We could talk to Tidepool, and we could talk to all of these terrific companies and get you the latest and greatest. And how do you restart this? And how do you replace that? And what's coming next? And those are great topics, and I enjoy doing that. But I think this is really important. And as Chris says, we need to stop blaming people and pushing them aside. Even with the best of care, complications can happen. Diabetes stinks. Well, as you'll hear, he had a foot issue, which turned into an ulcer, a bone infection that required intense treatment and a lot of travel. Ultimately, it was 32 weeks of care over the course of a year. Now, I will jump in and say that there are a lot of studies that show incredibly great news about complications. I mean, people diagnosed today with type 1 diabetes don't have the risk of the, incredibly horrible complications that happened 50 years ago or even 25 years ago. And I'll link up a lot of information. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the show, some of the studies and the hopefulness that is coming. That's not what this is about. We know things are getting better, but this is about acknowledging what does happen. So Chris found that starting the conversation over complications opened the door for a lot of other people to share their stories. And here's our conversation. Chris, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate you coming on to talk about it, which sometimes can be a difficult topic.
No problem. No, really, really kind of you to invite me.
Well, before we jump in, let's start by talking about your story. When were you diagnosed? What happened?
Yeah, it's kind of a, typically diagnosis story. I was diagnosed type 1 at the age of 25. I turned 50 this year, so I still think myself fortunate that I am only just about to live, get to half my life living with type 1. Standard things, the 4 Ts, quite a slow onset. There's nothing dramatic about it, to be honest. It's really dull. People, family members that hadn't seen me for a while, probably in the May of, 1994. Yeah, have you lost weight? First thing they say, you lost a bit of weight. I would say, no, I haven't, because I never weighed myself. I was always about 13 stone. I say not always. I wasn't born 13 stone, because that'd be kind of weird and painful for my mum.
Hey, it's Stacey. Just jumping in real quick with a clarification. 13 stone is about 180 pounds. So just for perspective, because you're going to hear in a couple of minutes that his weight went down quite a bit. All right, back to Chris.
I didn't bother about my weight. I didn't need to. I ate whatever I wanted and didn't worry about it. And that kind of continues. It was the May, I think it was my brother-in-law said it. And then someone else would say it later on. And after a while, you start thinking, maybe I have. And I'd weigh myself and, I have lost a little bit of weight. Excellent, not a problem. Yeah, I was getting more tired. I was keeping an eye on my weight and I was losing more and more to the point where I was starting to lose. I think I was getting to the point I was losing 2 or 3 pounds every day.
Wow. I
got right down, and being typical of me, I'll go to the doctors, I'll go next week. It'll be fine. And that's kind of how I always used to do things. I got down, I'm 6'2", and at diagnosis I weighed 10.5 stones, or about 148 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
So I was quite thin.
What finally got you to go to the doctor? I mean, 2 pounds a day is dramatic enough. What happened?
I was getting tired. She's now my wife, the wife she's at the moment. So I was working with my now wife. So I was driving into work with my wife. I worked around the corner, about a 10-minute walk. We parked at her office. I'd go to work, I'd do my job. I'd walk back, and I'd usually have to sit and wait for her. And one day I walked the 10-minute walk, and she's sitting there waiting for me, which is, I thought, finished early. That's rare. She says, where on earth have you been? What do you mean? And it had taken me 35 minutes to do the 10-minute walk. Just through tiredness. Not a conscious thing, but, I suddenly realised. The thing that actually made me do something about it was I nodded off at the wheel. I fell asleep at the wheel. Very luckily, and I'm almost embarrassed to say it now because I shouldn't have let the thing get that bad. Yeah, just, that kind of, that can happen to us all, a bit tired or very tired. You just have that nod and you kind of maybe swerve a bit and you wake up and think, crikey, that's not good. And that was the point I realised it was not just about me. All right, yes, I could have had a serious accident and crashed the car, but someone else could have been hurt. And I can't, you really got to do something about it though. And that is what prompted me to finally go to the doctors.
Were you diagnosed type 1 right away, or did you have to go through what a lot of adults do in terms of being misdiagnosed?
No, I was lucky. So I went to the doctors on the Friday. They did some bloods, took a urine sample, said, come back in a week, as they always do, when the results are through. So then by kind of 6 o'clock that evening, they were ringing up my house, finding me because they'd checked the urine and obviously found it was rather sugary, a lot of glucose in it. I went in on the Saturday. I don't think the type was actually mentioned, but, the doctor said, you've got diabetes. And I went, okay, fine. He said, I don't think you realise how serious it is. And I went, no, it's fine. It's in the family. It's not a problem. He was right. I didn't realise how serious it was. But to be honest, he'd have probably got the same reaction anyway, just because that's how I am. Okay. Tell me what this is and let's go deal with it. That's kind of how I deal with things. And I went in the hospital and I started on insulin after some fasting bloods. I was, naive at the time in my knowledge of diabetes. I thought, as people still do, whilst I'd love everyone to be educated, I still do understand why people who are not involved or, don't have any involvement in diabetes don't understand about it, because I didn't. So I thought if you have type 1, you take insulin, and if you have diabetes and you don't have insulin, you're type 2. So that was my misconception of the whole thing. Obviously, I know a bit more now. See, it wasn't really mentioned of what type, but I was straight on insulin type 1. It got talked about later. So I was lucky I didn't have any of the misdiagnosis. I didn't have any of the issues with that at all. How they actually did that diagnosis, whether they did C-peptide tests or whether they just looked at the symptoms and the rapid weight loss and that, I really don't know. And I've never really got to the bottom of. It's like one from day one.
Right. And then once they tell you, here's what you got to do to take care of yourself, the words matter a little bit less, I think.
Exactly, yeah. You kind of got a lot of information. I was too annoyed that I've got to stay in hospital, to be honest. I went in on a public holiday weekend, so no one was there. I ended up in 5 days when I really could have been in there for one, I thought. But my misconceptions were I left the doctor's surgery and he said, go and pack a bag, go to the hospital because there's a bed waiting for you. Misconception was I can never eat chocolate again. So I did a quick calculation. Well, I've been to the doctors. He's told me I've got diabetes. I can never eat chocolate again, but I'm going to hospital, so I'll be safe. So I had some chocolate on the way there.
Oh, gosh.
Thinking it would be my last ever. So, of course, I'm still think that my blood sugar was in millimoles, 26, whatever that is, multiplied by 18. So really, it still wasn't that high compared to some people, which I think backs up that slow onset and why it took so long.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm sure that a lot went from I'm diagnosed, I think I can't eat chocolate, I'm 25 years old, to now, years later, you are really one of the few voices talking about complications and trying to get rid of this, as you've said, this shroud of secrecy. So I don't want to fast forward too far through your story, but at what point did you start noticing that people in the diabetes community really didn't want to talk about complications?
Probably really when I got the foot issue, when was it? Not last year, late October 2017.
So it hasn't been that long. Okay, so tell me a little bit about what happened. A year and a half ago, you had your own complication. Let's talk about what happened.
Yeah, so before that, I've been referred to our eye clinic with the really badly informed letter of you've got changes. But so I've had my eyes have had a closer eye kept on them. They've been monitored more often because they've got a bit of a risk because there's been some slight changes. I've been very lucky that nothing's progressed with that. I got neuropathy in my feet and that kind of progressed. And neuropathy in your feet is one of these strange things. Apart from the shooting electric shock pains that I occasionally get at night, yeah, it's very gradual. You don't wake up one morning and your feet are numb. You can't feel them. So if you did, you'd have put out trouble walking. As a progressive thing, and they say, oh, you've got a bit of neuropathy and it might spread. So, but it was just, apart from the odd shooting pain, not feeling anything doesn't hurt, if that makes sense. So you don't really worry too much about it. You're just aware that you need to do foot checks more, or do foot checks. You need to keep an eye out for certain things, which I did kind of until I got an infection several years ago in my toe, which needed a little bit of treatment. It was probably about 4 or 5 weeks. That kind of woke me up to the fact, okay, you really need to keep an eye on this, because I was very surprised at how quickly a little bit of redness in your toe can go to a completely affected toe. Yeah, even within 24 hours, it can be quite rapid. So that was very much a case of, okay, I need to do something about it as soon as I see it, rather than just do like I did at diagnosis and go, oh, I'll go tomorrow, I'll go next week, because it's very, very rapid. So that was the first thing that led me to it. I didn't really think or feel anything about it. It was like you said, it's okay, let's get on with it, let's deal with it. I was on some antibiotics and it fixed it. So back in October of, I said 2017, I got a blister on my left ball of my left foot, just a blister, and it burst. So that is one downside. If you get a blister on your foot, most people feel it because it's quite sore, and they might, if they don't even during the day, if you don't do anything about it, you're probably gonna offload yourself. Actually, go a bit lighter on that foot and walk a bit differently and maybe look a bit silly. But you're going to do something about it if you don't take your shoe off and actually try and do something about it. So obviously I couldn't feel this, so it burst. I'm going to try and keep the gory details out.
Thank you.
I'll put too many pictures out about my foot that's upset people in the past. Kept it clean, antiseptic wipes, kept it dressed, really did take care of it. So the bits that when people say, oh, you got a complication, you look after yourself, there's a whole raft of things. But the first thing is, I'm very keen for people to realise I picked that up on my daily foot checks and I did everything I did to look after it. And ideal world, you go to a podiatrist, but are you going to go for every blister? Probably not. And it's a dilemma that we've come across. I've come across and people are talking about now. Is okay, when do you actually do something about it? It healed over and it looked absolutely fine.
Right back to Chris in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. And for 7 years, One Touch Vario test strips have delivered reliable results you can trust. And did you know they have the lowest copay on the most health plans and are always covered on traditional Medicare Part B? To upgrade today to the One Touch Vario Flex Meter, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the One Touch logo. Coverage and payment may be subject to coinsurance, deductible, and patient eligibility requirements. LifeScan does not guarantee coverage or payment. Now back to my conversation with Chris. Before you go any further, let's talk a little bit about what led to this, because I think a lot of people may be listening and thinking, well, if you have issues with your feet, you must have not taken care of yourself. You must have been uncompliant. There must have been issues. Without getting too personal, Chris, because it's really not our business, can you share a little bit about those thoughts that you had for yourself? I mean, I'm not going to ask you, what was your A1C right before this happened? But did you say to yourself, gosh, I haven't been doing what I need to be doing?
No. You can ask me. My A1C at that time was the best it had been in my entire life with type 1. So that's another important thing I think that people need to realize. I didn't think anything apart from the fact that I've got something that needs to be looked at, sorted, and was going to take probably 6 to 8 weeks. That was what I was told, because it wasn't that deep and it was quite wide. It was just very raw. It was an ulcer. It was actually my wife that said to me, "Oh, do you think you should have looked after yourself a bit better?" And I always caveat this, that I don't want anyone listening to judge you that she should know better or anything like that. It was genuine concern. And I have not ever, quite deliberately, because I'm a bit of a control freak, involved anyone else in my diabetes care apart from me. I don't intend to, family-wise, unless I have to in the future. So, yeah, it was a question. And I did a very quick calculation. And in my head, I ran through 20, 23 or 24 years what it was. And I said, no, not at all.
Well, you understand why I would ask that question, right? I mean, that's what people think.
Exactly. The people, and this is where I started to think, and it started to become aware, more apparent to me. Things I've learned in the past. There is this assumption that you get diagnosed with diabetes of whichever type, and then you live your life with diabetes. And if you get diagnosed with a complication, it is because you didn't look after yourself, which is not true. When I tell my story, other talks I've done, I will start with being diagnosed on twice daily injections of mixed insulin with a meter that took, you used to need to sever an artery or maybe a limb to actually get enough blood on it. You had to take a finger off. You could only ever do 10 checks in your life and you'd run out. And it wasn't that accurate. And I wrote down what it said like I was supposed to. I ate the fixed carb loads that I was given, and I took my insulin. My A1C was reasonably high. It'd come down from what I was diagnosed at, so that was good. And then you go in and every 3 months, say, and things would get tweaked. But, the ability to manage your diabetes with the knowledge I had, and this is what I always say, I managed it the best I could with the knowledge I had and the equipment I had. And that's always gone. I moved to MDI. I wasn't that particularly knowledgeable about MDI, partly through my fault because I never asked the right questions. And if I was asked, do you understand? I'd say yes, because I just wanted to go. And partly, for everything, it's not a failing of anybody. It's just one of those things. So if you lived with type 1 or type 2 or any sort of diabetes for 20 odd years, just by the nature of that, you are going to have had less knowledge, less equipment to manage it than you do now. People who were diagnosed 60 years ago had to have the needle sharpened for them. They boiled their syringes. They were basically making sure they stayed alive. Now they may be on a pump and CGM and have much more equipment. Some of those people will unfortunately have complications. Some of them I know don't have. And one guy in particular, a guy called Pete Davis in the UK, is quite open. He said, there's an element of luck there, because look at how different it is over a period of 10, 20, 30, up to 60 years. You can't ever tell here that he didn't look after himself. He did the best he could, and his risk factor didn't kick in for whatever reason. The longer you live with diabetes, just by the nature of it, the risk of complications rises.
I'm going to ask a personal question, and you do not have to answer this, but I bet you will. Were you upset with your wife for asking you that question?
No, she probably didn't have dinner on the table, so I was more upset. No, I'm kidding. I was probably ready to be. But actually, no, it's at the time, it was a fair enough question. It's driven out of, obviously, I've known her for obviously more than 30 years. It was more of a question of, is there anything you need to do differently now? And again, kind of yes, but no. The things I've learned from it aren't about my diabetes management. If we go back in time, would I have tweaked things a bit differently? Maybe, but it's a cumulative effect. It's all about risk reduction for me, and at the same time, not letting diabetes run my life for me. I want to fit. Diabetes fits around my life. I don't fit my life around diabetes, and that's the way I always want to do it.
Not to fast forward through the whole story, I'm sorry about this, but how are you now? How's your foot health? Is it resolved? Is it an ongoing issue for you?
It is fixed, but it's always going to be at more risk. It is a really long story. I can try and summarize it. So what happened? Well, I got that ulcer. It was supposed to be about 6 to 8 weeks. It was being dressed and it was being looked after. I got a couple of infections in it, one really, really bad one. And before that, they'd been looking for possibilities of bone infection with x-rays and they didn't find it at all. Oh. They did find a lot of healed broken bones. I didn't realize there were times that I'd obviously broken my foot and broken some toes. And I didn't know. I couldn't feel it, so I just walked about on it. It might have been a bit swollen. But again, I just went, oh, that's fine. Because my education of what to look for in my checks was for cracks in the skin, cuts, or signs of infection, not changing the shape of foot. And I learned that's very key. If you notice a change in the shape of your foot, you need to do something about it. I've got some inactive Charcot, so I had Charcot, which is another issue that I didn't know about, and that had fixed itself or gone, but it had damaged the joint in one of the toes. Yeah, it was kind of a track record. Trouble is, the way I work as a healthcare professional, podiatrist, is listing the broken bones, and the list is getting longer and longer, and the damage and the things that are now not so bad. Part of my brain's going, oh, that's really cool. It's kind of that stupid bit in my head. It's like, I did that and I'm still okay. Not that I would ever go and deliberately do it. But yeah, there was lots of mitigating factors. So I basically ended up with the ulcer closed right up, but actually went deep, went to the bone, ended up with a bone infection as well as an ulcer. Lots of treatment, lots of antibiotics. I did oral antibiotics and intravenous daily IV antibiotics. Out of 54 weeks of treatment, which is what it took before they actually gave me the all clear, I think I did something like 32 weeks on antibiotics. 15 were on IV. I worked away from home at the time. So when they said you need to come in every day and have this IV, I said, we need to talk about it, but I can't. And they were really good. They said, okay, well, in cases where we need to, or it needs to be done, we can, if you're happy with it, teach you how to do it. Then you can self-administer. So I did that for every day for 15 weeks. And I did travel a little bit as well. I went to Australia, Germany and New York, which had never been done in the clinic. My guys are great. My team's absolutely fantastic. They're very open to discussing, trying things that don't fit within the normal safe model. We talk about it. We talk about the risk. We talk about backup plans and what if it goes wrong, what will we do? And it all worked really, really well. Now it's fixed. Where the bone infection was is by basically a dislocated metatarsal. Don't even know how I did that. It's pointing down, and where the infection was and underneath it, there's less flesh tissue now, so there's less padding. So it's at risk of getting damaged again and something happening. So at the moment, I'm waiting for some insoles in my shoe. So I do wear a boot if I wear an offloading, but if I walk about too much, if I've got to do a lot of steps. But it is okay. Obviously, the danger is I can't feel where it was. I've got no feeling there, which was great when they were checking the depth of the ulcer, because the way they do it was to probe it with a very thin metal spike. So I was quite ironically pleased that I couldn't feel that. But yeah, it's just those things little things that add up. You can't feel that bit of your foot. It's not an issue, but actually you've got a bone that could get damaged, so you would need to feel it. So we're putting everything in place. As I said, they've been absolutely fantastic. I'll get these insoles, and then hopefully I will actually be able to wear a matching pair of shoes again.
What do you take away from this? I mean, you've blogged about it, you've shared your story, you're trying to make the stigma of it go away, but I'll be honest with you, I think this is not going to be a popular podcast episode. I really do. I think people are not, they're afraid to listen almost. Is that how you have felt? I mean, I don't want you to feel like you're wasting your time coming on, but I'm concerned that people.
Maybe just end it now then.
No, but people, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you could be right, because the whole hashtag talk about complications happened when I first put out the tweet, and I've just been diagnosed with my first kind of proper diabetes-related complication. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm sure other people have got them. And people started talking that, well, actually, I've got this issue, I've got this issue. And then someone else will go, well, a frozen shoulder. I didn't know, I've got that, but I didn't know that was related to my diabetes and actually more prone to it. So it started a really good discussion. So I think it may well be popular for people that have got diabetes-related complications. If you haven't, then maybe it won't be. It's something that people don't want to think about. And it's a difficult thing to discuss because how do you discuss and educate without scaring people? We've all seen the ridiculous things that talk about, you need to look after your feet, and all they talk about is amputations. For me, amputation, definitely isn't a complication. It is the kind of final treatment for a foot issue. But talk about foot care. For me, one of the messages I want people to get out, and I'm obviously not a qualified podiatrist, is what to check for when you're looking at your feet. The actual things we have to notice it. And for me, it's spotting things, acting quickly, but actually knowing the pathway into treatment in your particular healthcare system or your region in whatever part of the world you live in, because that can be a challenge. It's easy for me because I'd already had a foot issue, so I was at medium risk. I'm now at high risk. I just pick up the phone, I've got a number, and they will see me as soon as they can, and it will be either next day if they can't do it that day. So ironically, because I've had this issue, my foot care is a piece of cake now. But I'd like people everywhere, but people who've got the condition and don't have them, to realise that actually it's not your fault if you do get them. And again, that's a tricky subject because there are people that have never really been out of range on A1C. They're minimising their risk, but it doesn't mean they will definitely not get complications, and that's a hard message as well.
It is. And there are people who we would think would get complications and don't. You said the people who lived with it a long time.
There are so many factors that can come in, and obviously I'm not a medic, I don't know, but it's the things that add to risk. So sometimes they're out of your control. I use an example of my dad, who February of last year, unfortunately, had a stroke. Now, I wrote a blog post about it. He was not the stereotypical image you would have of someone that you would expect to have a stroke, and all of that stigma around that kind of thing. He's about 78, I think, rides his bike every day, but he got a blood clot in his neck. Mm. But the thing is, he's at risk of stroke by the sheer fact that he is alive and a human being.
Yeah.
So I have that risk. Then I get diagnosed with diabetes, so my risk goes up. The amount of time I live with it, my risk goes up. But then having a family history, which is out of my control, my risk goes up. Doesn't mean I'll have a stroke. Right. It means I need to maybe focus on the things that I can do to mitigate that risk and try and bring that risk level down. It's like crossing the road, If you run across the road with your eyes shut, you're probably more likely to get hit by a car than if you look both ways. But then you can't not go out and just stand on the pavement and never cross the road because you're terrified of it. You've got to find that balance.
The conversations you've had in the past year or two about complications, I wonder, you said people kind of came out of the woodwork saying, well, I didn't want to talk about this, but I have this, or this happened to me. Is there a bit of a relief of sharing it? I mean, we talk about mental health with diabetes. I haven't heard a lot about mental health and complications, but it's got to be hard to hold on to that.
Yeah, because it's another thing you've got to deal with. So I think with any condition you have, whether it's diabetes related or not, if you can, it's that peer support. If you can meet someone or talk to someone who's gone through the same or similar things. How many times do we see anywhere in the diabetes community, someone will put something out and then someone else will come in going, you know what, I thought I was the only one that had that or felt that or had experienced that. And they're not. No one is, because there's always someone else out there who's been through the same or similar. Talking about complications, we talk about it as much as we want. And someone did point out to me once online, there's no point talking about it. It's how do we help people mitigate those risks? Mm-hmm. Well, we need to understand them. For starters, you need to understand what your risk is before you can mitigate it. But it's the stigma thing is a really big thing for me, because as much as with your diabetes management, if you do get a related complication, it's another thing that is just going to play on your mind, probably demotivate you. And if nothing else, even if I like to think I'm fairly resilient, even if, for me, 54 weeks of treatment takes up a lot of effort and thought, driving your own care to link things up, piecing it together, asking the questions to understand the condition you've got and the treatment you're having, takes quite a lot of mind space to do. And if you've then got someone asking you, and it did happen right near the end, well, I'm still seeing a podiatrist, and me and my podiatrist get on so well, asked me, I've been through your notes, I see at one point you were non-compliant. We had a great conversation about it. I said, okay, we can talk about what you mean in a minute, but can we talk about what you said? I pointed out, I said, personally, and I know a lot of people don't, I don't like the word non-compliant because it insinuates to me that I deliberately didn't look after myself and didn't try and do the best for myself. She was mortified. She said, honestly, I'd never thought about it that way. I am so sorry. And hopefully she will never use that word again. Even she read it in my notes. That was it. She just repeated what was in my notes. So that's at the end of when I've actually been pretty much given the all clear. But you're quite tired of it and you're kind of looking for it, even though, because it hasn't finished yet. I'm still going, and there's still bits to be looked at, and I will go to the podiatrist more often because they're keeping an eye on me, which is fantastic. So it doesn't kind of end, it kind of tails off and then comes back to a new norm for where you are. So at the end of that, to be told or to hear the word, well, you were non-compliant, can really demotivate. And the hardest thing in diabetes management, in my opinion, is to keep motivated, to keep going every day and do the best you can every day, which differs. Some days you can put more effort in than other days. Life gets in the way. And if life getting in the way is a related complication, kind of get into that vicious circle. So I put more weight on in the last year and a bit, partly because I like pizza, partly because I had to walk less. I'm not a great for exercising, but I had to keep off my foot. Where I worked, I parked because I didn't have on-site parking because of the waiting list and the fact I was a contractor and that wasn't a permanent employee. I parked a mile away from work and walked in. It was a lovely village and it was really nice. I stopped doing that when I was told to keep off. They were really good. They gave me a parking space. So suddenly I'm not walking 2 miles a day. That's 2 miles a day less. Yeah. That's 10 miles a week. And that's a lot of steps. I didn't change my lifestyle because I didn't think any different. So I'm still eating pizza and maybe having a beer or two at night. Not every, it was every night. So you put on a bit of weight. At that time of day, my blood sugar then starts, blood glucose levels are going up a bit because I'm not doing that. So that period in the evening, I'm running a bit higher. At the time, I really want to try and be as much in range as I can because I know it will help me heal. But because I put on a bit of weight as well, my insulin resistance goes up a bit. You can see just by getting this one thing, you can get this vicious circle and you need to kind of break it. So, but where's your motivation to? You even if you want to go down to the gym or go for a really long walk, you've got this big boot on and you're told not to walk on it because you don't want to actually make your arthritis or your bone infection worse. So it's, psychologically, it's easy to just wear you down, I think, wear people down. And that's why I'm really keen that we get the language of complications right. Stop using terms that make people think like they've failed, they didn't look after themselves, or that it was their fault.
Before I let you go, talk to me about Grumpy. Where did that come from? It's such a great name. Obviously, you've been grumpy from way back.
Oh, from birth, yeah. I was born with a frown. People always ask me this, and it's quite simple. I'm grumpy, and I use an insulin pump. Grumpy pump. It was when I started on Twitter. I saw there were quite a few people out there didn't use their real names, and they kind of had characters, usually ending Betic. I didn't really think of anything, and it was just that. I am known as someone who is fairly grumpy in a kind of honest, cynical way. But yeah, that was it. It was that simple. And then after a while, I think my logo was just whatever pump I had at the time. It was the Animus pump at the time. It's taken off their website. And then I suddenly realized that if I could go into Microsoft Paint, I could cut and paste the pump and put it on Grumpy as a kind of a profile picture. And I was just waiting for Disney to sue me because I'm sure they will at one point.
I don't know. I'm looking at the picture of you right now. Well, not you. I'm looking at the cartoon, and it just cracks me up. It's great.
That's me. I'm a bit taller. But
yes.
My beard's black, not white. But.
Chris, thanks so much for joining me to talk about all this. And I'm going to link up your blog and your story, too, because, we went through it pretty quickly, and I know there's a lot more to consider. So thanks for keeping us posted as you continue to move forward.
No, thanks very much.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information on what Grumpy is doing. Chris, I still don't know if I should call him Chris or Grumpy for the purposes of this show. But, a lot more information. I'll link up to his blog. I'll link up to a few other things that he's written for some journals about complications. And I'll also link up some information about the risk of complications. I know many of you, as you listen, are saying, well, can that happen to my child? Can that happen to me? And, of course, as we mentioned, Chris is doing great. His health was good. He was given different tools 25 years ago. But his A1C was the lowest it had been before this had all started. So I think it's important to look at this from a very factual and non-emotional angle, which is really hard to do. So I'll link up as much information as I can. That's always in the show notes. You can go to diabetes-connections.com or whatever podcast app you're listening on. If you listen that way, every app has a little bit more information, details. Some of them don't support links. Some of you listen on Facebook, so you can always go to the homepage. And I really try my best to put a lot of information in there. This is also a great topic to bring up with your diabetes educator. And in our community connection this week, for many of us, our CDE, our certified diabetes educator, is our first point of education, information, and support. Community Connection is brought to you every week by Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the T-Slim X2 insulin pump. And, when it comes to educators, we've been very, very lucky. Ours, we met, I want to say, a week after Benny was diagnosed. She is still our educator, and she not only talks the talk, she definitely walks that walk as a diabetes parent. She has 2 sons who have type 1, and that helped us immensely in our journey with type 1 diabetes. So I was really excited to talk to Crystal Broj at the D-Data Summit that happened last fall. Crystal is the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer with the American Association of Diabetes Educators, AADE. And we sat down and talked about what educators are learning about these days, a new app specifically for educators. It's called Dana, and how, and this blew me away, diabetes educators only reach a very small number of people with diabetes. Now, granted, a lot of those people have type 2, but still, it is amazing how much work there is to do in terms of getting the word out, getting the education out. So here's my interview with Crystal Broj. What are some of the challenges that you face as educators? It's a different role, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. And educators only reach about 7% of the patient population. And so with that, anytime we can get more recognition so that we get referred to, because we help with the technology. And that's why I'm here, is because of the technology and helping educators help patients with the technology and really filling that role that educators have more time to do that work with them with the technology, where a physician only gets 6 minutes, but you get a much broader time to work through the self-management issues, because patients are on their own 99% of the time.
I would assume that a CDE, healthcare providers, get continual education. But the technology really isn't part of that, is it? Is that kind of up to the individual to stay up to date?
Yeah, it is. And that's why we created our Dana platform, because there's no one place to go to get that technology background. So last summer in August, we launched our Dana, which stands for Diabetes Advanced Network Access. And that is a website where you can go and see all the diabetes products. It's a cross-section of everything, all the technical specifications. So in one place, you're not going from website to website to website and then having to dig 4 or 5 levels down to find the information that you're looking for. We also have education, like how to use CGM. We've just launched a new BGM course that's 6 hours free for members. We have a discussion board. We have resources. So it's just a one-stop shop for everything technology.
If you're speaking directly to educators who are maybe hearing about Dana for the first time, what do they need to do?
They need to just log in and get familiar with it, because the most important thing is to get used to it so that when you need it, you know how to use it quickly and efficiently.
Very basic, pardon my ignorance. It's a website that they know of. They can go in. They have a login.
Yeah, they just use their normal member login from AADE, and then they can go in, and then it's very simply laid out, so it's easy to follow and easy to research. It has a great search function, so if you're just looking for a specific thing, enter the search term and you'll find everything.
Great. What's the feedback been on it so far? I know you just launched.
Yeah, really, really good. We've had over 4,000 members a month entering and checking it out, and that's a really good thing. And already getting ideas for a phase 2, which is always good. So, yeah.
You said that only 7% of people with diabetes have an educator. That's a stunning number to me.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, right?
What can be done to change that? Is that a cost? Is it an education? Is it access?
A lot of times they need a referral, and the primary care isn't right now sending people to educators. So whether they don't know or they don't know what it is, but it's not just education. They really help with the self-management. So a lot of people look at education and go, oh, I have to see an educator. I don't need a course. But that's not what educators do. I mean, they do teach you about diabetes, but it's more about how do you manage with this day to day.
And I'll put a plug in if it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
My son's diabetes educator was with us from almost day one. Now, granted, my son was not yet 2 when we were diagnosed, so we would take any education we could get. But she has been an incredible resource over the years, and I've never felt like we've gone through a course, as you say. Mm-hmm. It's more, my endocrinologist has this specific set of knowledge, but I almost feel like my CDE almost lives it more in a way. Not to take anything away from my endo, but she seems to get more of the nitty-gritty. Why don't you try this? Or we're hearing good things about this new either technology or medication, and kind of is able to come down on our level a little more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's where they're so good at coaching and empathy and working with patients, just because they have the more time and they have that piece where they're into the day-to-day. And so they really want to help people live healthier lives.
So if a person with diabetes is listening and they don't have an educator, what's the step? How do they get there?
They can either ask their physician, whether it's an endo or not, or they can go to our website. There's a place that says Find a Diabetes Educator on the homepage, and they can start looking for someone close.
What's your story? How did you get involved in this?
So my background is technology, and so I was a programmer and an analyst and grew up through the ranks, but I looked at this organization because my sister is a type 1. She was a late in life type 1, and then my best friend and my husband's best friend both have type 2. And so this really hits close to home for me.
What have you learned in the diabetes community coming from a technology background that has surprised you?
I've looked at programs and websites and stuff my whole life, but diabetes technology is so different and so diverse, from the BGMs to the pens to the pumps, and there's always new stuff coming out, and it's so hard to keep up with what's next and what's best. And I think that's, if I'm from a technology background and I have a hard time just trying to figure it all out, someone who doesn't have that background and is just given a piece of machinery to use has got to be overwhelming.
Do you think what we're learning here is going to be, is there a takeaway that's actionable for people with diabetes?
Just don't give up. Don't give up trying. Don't give up trying these new technologies. We talked yesterday about learning about virtual reality and how that might be a way for people to try technology before they actually take it home. I think that's an outstanding opportunity to be able to start sharing that. It's also a way to teach providers about empathy and understanding what a person might go through wearing a pump or something like that. And I think that's new stages like that are always so exciting because it just gives everybody more of a chance to figure it out.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me here.
Well, thank you very much. Have a great day.
More information on AADE, on Dana, and on diabetes educators. If you don't have one, what to look for. We discussed that briefly, but, really how to go about that if you think it's something that would benefit you. And I do think that a relationship with your endocrinologist and with a diabetes educator can go a long way. I mean, you don't have to go all the time. We've probably had 4 sit-down meetings with our CDE over the 12 years. But being able to call her, run things by her has been extremely helpful. It's just a really complimentary bit of care that goes along with your endocrinologist. So I do highly recommend that. Okay, on to what has become my favorite part of the show each week. Tell me something good. This is where you, as the listener, let me know what's going on in your life that is good, that is worth noting, that you want to share with everybody. You want to just yell it from the mountaintop. And I love this. We're getting so many great stories. And Tell Me Something Good is brought to you by Real Good Foods. Now, I cook dinner just about every weeknight. And if you have known me for a long time, you know that that is a big change. I wrote a cookbook for charity years ago for my local JDRF chapter that was called I Can't Cook, but I Know Someone Who Can. I really did. That was a book I put out in 2008 when I was working full time, early mornings, and life was bananas. Life is still bananas, but I'm a better cook now. And, but sometimes even with all of that planning, you just want something convenient, and that's one reason why I love Real Good Foods. It's not just their food is delicious, low carb, and grain-free. It's that you don't have to order everything through the mail like you do with a lot of these specialty companies. The cauliflower crust pizzas, the poppers are in your grocery store or your Walmart freezer. And now you can order online. It's a great way to get mixed packs to try everything. That's how we initially started out, trying the different pizzas and things like that. But, it's really hard to find lower carb, good tasting stuff in the grocery store. Real Good Foods makes it easy. Find out more. Just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. Two great stories about kids in our community doing good stuff. First, Christina Salzagar wrote in and said, I have a great news story. My 5-year-old just tested her blood sugar for the first time. We are so proud of her. She was diagnosed 2 years ago, and every day she gets a little bit more brave. That's my Rose. Christina, thank you for writing that in. Christina posted this in our Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group, so you can see a great picture of Rose being really proud that she tested her blood sugar. Way to go. And Christina, thank you so much for letting us know. I also want to tell you about Logan Merwin. His mom posted in the Facebook group that Logan won the JDRF Spirit Award at Run Disney. Run Disney is that big event that they have every year. There's a lot of fundraisers going on there. JDRF has a team, but, you can do a 5K or, different lengths up to a marathon, or you can do more than one. Logan and his mom, Samantha, have been big advocates with JDRF. They do lots of fundraisers. They're also very involved in Children with Diabetes Friends for Life. Samantha does a lot of, an incredible amount of work with the auction that goes on there every year. And they've been on the show before. So Logan goes by the Elbow Bump Kid. I will link up the episode where we talked to him, and he goes by that name because he has a lot of allergies. He's got food allergies even before he was diagnosed with type 1, and he learned at a very tiny little age not to shake hands but to bump elbows. So he's a pretty cool kid who just turned 12 recently as well. So happy birthday, Logan, and thanks, Samantha, for sending that in. The best way to get me your Tell Me Something Good stories, you can email me, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com, or I post in the Facebook group all the time looking for stories. And it's been a lot of fun because we don't share all of them on the show, but people are reading each other's and, liking and giving attaboys, and it's really fun. So I'll try to get as many as I can in. I had to double up this week because we're getting so many, which I love. What a nice problem to have. On the show next week, continuing our new series, me and Maura McCarthy answering your Dear Abby type diabetes parenting questions. I am really excited about this. Maura is such a great advocate and educator, the author of many books and columns about diabetes, including Raising Teens with Diabetes, which we will be giving away a copy of that book. You got to listen next week to find out who won for the January questions that were submitted. And we'll be talking a lot about discipline and type 1, mood swings, things like that, some information about babysitting, and some funny stories as well. And for those of you who know Maura personally, and frankly, she has probably the largest social media following of any individual in diabetes land on Facebook. She had a big health scare last month. She's doing really well. She's getting better every day. And, of course I told her, you don't have to come on the show. We'll wait. No problem. But Maura being Maura, she couldn't wait. She really wanted to do it. She's just an amazing person. And I was so happy she's okay and thrilled to have her back on. So that's next week. As always, thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. And thank you for listening. We've made some changes this year. Let me know what you think. Jump into the Facebook group. Drop me a line on Twitter or Instagram. On Instagram, it's just Stacey Sims. There's only one account. No need to have lots of double stuff going on there. It's just me. But on Facebook and Twitter, we do have Stacey Sims and Diabetes Connections. I think I'm pretty easy to reach. If you have feedback, good, bad, indifferent, I really do like to hear it. The show is here for you, and I'm really trying to deliver the best content and education and a little bit of entertainment and fun about diabetes that I can. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.